A mine of debt, buried deep beneath the world's largest economy, ready to explode at any moment. This isn't a sci-fi thriller. It's the reality of the U.S. national debt. As of June 2025, it sits at approximately $36.21 trillion, which means each American owes around $106,000.
I've been watching the standoff in Washington these past few weeks over the national debt. It's been a tense debate because the stakes were so high. A default on our debt would have been a devastating blow to our economy at a time when we can least afford it. It would have meant higher borrowing costs, higher prices, and put millions more jobs in jeopardy.
But let's pause. Have you ever truly imagined what $36 trillion even looks like? If we stacked $100 bills equal to that debt, that pile would reach space and keep going. It's enough to wrap around the Earth more than 130 times. This isn't just a big number, it's a ticking time bomb, and the timer's speeding up. And here's the thing, interest payments alone are set to exceed $1 trillion in 2026, marking a historic financial strain. The fuse is burning fast. Over 60% of Americans admit they're worried about what this means for their future. But how did we get here? Who's responsible? And what happens if this debt mine detonates, shaking markets and lives across the globe? Let's go back to where it all began.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
The year was 1981. Ronald Reagan had just taken office, and he had a message.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. So what did he do? He cut taxes massively. Military spending skyrocketed. The result? The U.S. national debt tripled during his presidency, from less than $1 trillion to over $2.6 trillion.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies? I know this is a formidable technical task, one that may not be accomplished before the end of this century. I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete.
And then came Star Wars. Not the movie, but a dazzling, multi-billion-dollar missile defense fantasy launched by President Reagan. A bold vision of lasers in space and shields against nukes, it promised safety but delivered skyrocketing costs, technical failures, and little real-world defense. Billions were spent, yet all America got was a dream that never left the drawing board. It was the first time Americans saw what happens when you cut revenue, but don't cut spending. But this was just the beginning. Reagan passed the torch, but the debt kept burning. Let's see what came next.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor.
George H.W. Bush inherited a ticking debt bomb amid global turbulence.
Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic.
With the 1990 to 91 Gulf War, the U.S. forked out roughly $61 billion, though allies covered most of the cost, sending the national debt soaring to around $4.4 trillion. Americans cheered the swift military victory, yet beneath the celebrations lurked unease. The fiscal ledger darkened, and Bush's choices piled another costly layer onto the debt mine. The optimism of the 1990s arrived, yet the debt's march didn't stop. A brief pause in deficit growth was followed by new budget struggles. Let's move forward.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States,
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States,
and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
And then came Bill Clinton. To many Americans, he was the energetic reformer the nation had long waited for. Young, charismatic, and armed with promises of prosperity. The year was 1993. Bill Clinton stepped into the Oval Office with a promise to restore America's economic strength. The country faced daunting challenges: a soaring national debt, a budget deficit nearing $290 billion, and decades of fiscal mismanagement. Clinton, alongside his Vice President Al Gore and their economic team, launched a bold plan to tackle the crisis head-on. Their strategy combined tax increases on the wealthiest Americans, disciplined spending cuts, and policies to fuel economic growth. Over the next 8 years, this approach paid off. By 1998, the United States recorded its first budget surplus in decades, a surplus that grew even larger, reaching $237 billion by the fiscal year 2000, the largest in American history at the time. This was a remarkable turnaround, fueled by rising tax revenues from a booming economy and tighter federal control over expenditures. However, despite these surpluses, the national debt continued to climb, largely due to the accumulated interest on previous loans. By 1999, the debt stood at $5.6 trillion, a shadow lurking beneath the surface of the economic boom. The American people celebrated the unprecedented prosperity, unaware of the ticking time bomb beneath their feet. But as history shows, the calm before the storm is often the most dangerous moment of all.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States,
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States,
and will to the best of my ability
preserve,
protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
The year was 2001. George W. Bush took office amid a nation still riding the economic upswing of the 1990s, but the clouds of uncertainty were gathering fast. Then on September 11th, the unthinkable happened. A devastating terrorist attack that shocked the world and changed America forever.
The FBI is investigating reports that there was a hijacking of an American Airlines 767 out of Boston. That was perhaps one of the planes that was involved in this disaster this morning. Apparently both towers of the World Trade Center hit by aircraft. And additionally, a report that a plane has crashed into the Pentagon this morning. West wing of the White House has been evacuated. President Bush was not there.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
In response, President Bush launched the war on terror, beginning with military campaigns in Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and topple the Taliban regime. Soon after, in 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq under controversial claims of weapons of mass destruction, igniting a prolonged and costly conflict. While the wars raged overseas, Bush also pushed through significant tax cuts, aiming to stimulate the economy and fulfill campaign promises. However, these cuts came at a high price. The national debt surged dramatically, doubling from about $5.7 trillion in 2000 to over $10 trillion by the end of his presidency. The Iraq War alone cost an estimated $2 trillion, money that critics argue could have funded universal health care for millions of Americans or invested in education and infrastructure. Amid rising debt, public concern grew. Polls revealed a nation increasingly anxious about the fiscal path, the growing deficit, and the long-term consequences of mounting debt. The ticking debt mine was getting louder, and the stakes had never been higher.
Swear
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear
that I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
that I will execute
The office of President of the United States.
President of the United States faithfully.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Finally, Obama and his team arrived. To many Americans, and even to parts of the opposition, it felt like hope had returned. The man who would restore America's glory, they believed, had come. The economic wounds of the past would begin to heal. And maybe, just maybe, America's crushing debt would start to shrink. But reality had different plans. When Barack Obama took office in January 2009, he inherited an economy in freefall. The 2008 financial meltdown had shattered Wall Street, erased over $19 trillion in household wealth, and sent unemployment skyrocketing.
And the government contracts we've signed with thousands of businesses. Keep in mind, if we don't do that, If we don't come to an agreement, we could lose our country's AAA credit rating. Not because we didn't have the capacity to pay our bills, we do, but because we didn't have a AAA political system to match our AAA credit rating. And make no mistake, for those who say they oppose tax increases on anyone, a lower credit rating would result potentially in a tax increase on everyone in the form of higher interest rates on their mortgages, their car loans, their credit cards, and that's inexcusable. There are a lot of crises in the world that we can't always predict or avoid. Hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, terrorist attacks.
A bold $831 billion stimulus package, one of the largest in U.S. history. Bailouts, infrastructure spending, direct aid. It stopped the bleeding, but at a cost. The national debt doubled by the time he left office, reaching nearly $20 trillion. Was it a rescue, or was it reckless? By 2013, the debt-to-GDP ratio soared past 120%. Global investors started to worry. For the first time since World War II, America's financial stability became a global question mark.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
And then came Donald Trump, a billionaire outsider with a golden promise to drain the swamp and make America great again. To his supporters, he was the long-awaited savior, a man who would slash debt, rewrite trade deals, and bring back forgotten industries. Even skeptics were curious. Could this unorthodox president do what career politicians had failed to deliver for decades? Could he stop the ticking debt bomb? The nation held its breath, and the clock kept ticking. Trump's economic agenda was aggressive. Major tax cuts, deregulation, and a trade war with China. In 2017, he passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, slashing corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. Supporters hailed it as a growth engine, but the Congressional Budget Office warned the plan would add $1.9 trillion to the national debt over a decade.
These are the people right behind me. They've worked so long, so hard. It's been an amazing experience, I have to tell you. Hasn't been done in 34 years, but actually really hasn't been done because we broke every record. It's the largest, I always say the most massive, but it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country. And reform, but tax cut. Really something special. And I noticed this just came out 2 minutes ago. They handed it to me. AT&T plans to increase U.S. capital spending $1 billion and provide $1,000 special bonus to more than 200,000 U.S. employees, and that's because of what we did. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Then came the unexpected. The COVID-19 pandemic. Lockdowns, job losses, and mass panic. In response, Trump signed multiple relief packages totaling over $3 trillion, including the CARES Act, one of the largest stimulus efforts in U.S. history. By the end of Trump's first term, the national debt had exploded from $19.9 trillion in 2017 to approximately $27.7 trillion by January 2021. Public concern followed. According to Pew Research in late 2020, 65% of Americans said they were worried about the growing deficit. Economists warned of rising interest costs and long-term instability.
I mean, Mexico, nobody knows this. We lost last year in terms of a trade deficit, $100 billion with Mexico. We can't keep doing this, folks, and we're not going to. So we're renegotiating NAFTA, which was probably the worst deal ever made in the history of trade. But with China, we're at $375 billion trade deficit. So we started a process, and we'll see how it ends up. But we're going to win. You know, I always said we had an imbalance of $504 billion. And I always said, when you're down $504 billion, you can't lose. Okay? We lost years ago by presidents and others allowing this to happen.
The swamp wasn't drained. The mine wasn't diffused. In fact, the foundations of the debt mountain were shaking more than ever.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
And then came Joe Biden, a seasoned Washington insider stepping into office during one of the most fragile moments in modern American history. The country was still reeling from the pandemic. Unemployment was high, inflation was looming, and political division had reached a boiling point. To many, Biden represented a return to stability, a calm hand after the storm. His promise was clear: build back better, rebuild the economy, restore trust in government, and fix what had been broken. But behind the headlines, the debt mine kept expanding, quietly, relentlessly.
Today to raise the debt limit. And why the Republicans in Congress, what they're doing today is so reckless and dangerous in my view. Raising the debt limit comes down to paying what we already owe, what has already been acquired, not anything new. It starts with a simple truth. The United States is a nation that pays its bills and always has. From its inception, we have never defaulted. What we pay for, so it keeps us a great nation. Social Security benefits for seniors, salaries for brave service members, and benefits for veterans, and other financial obligations for our people and for our nation.
Biden's administration launched a series of ambitious spending plans. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan to combat COVID's aftermath.
The House of Representatives took the first step toward making it a reality. And I want to thank, and I called her just a few moments ago, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, for extraordinary leadership, and all those who supported our plan. And with their vote, we're one step closer.
The $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law to rebuild roads, bridges, and internet access. Proposals for trillions more in climate, education, and healthcare reforms under the Build Back Better banner. Each plan aimed to invest in the future, but each added weight to the national debt. By early 2025, the U.S. debt stood at $34.8 trillion, nearly 129% of GDP, a level not seen since World War II.
To Wall Street 2 days ago and speaking to the United States Congress a few hours ago, and what we described as the mega's economic vision. It was days before tax day. Do you think he told the wealthy and powerful that it's about time they step up and start paying a fair share? Not a word. Do Do you think he told the billion-dollar companies to stop stashing profits in tax havens off the coast and shipping jobs overseas? I didn't hear any of that, did you?
Interest payments were ballooning, projected to surpass $1 trillion annually by 2026. And the people were watching. A Gallup poll from late 2024 showed that 7 in 10 Americans believed the national debt was a major threat to the country's future. The promises were noble, the spending was historic, but the mine beneath America's feet was more unstable than ever, and the fuse was burning faster.
The first item that President Trump is signing is the rescission of 78 Biden-era executive actions, executive orders, presidential memoranda, and others.
Trump is back. And while his return stirred celebration among millions who believe he alone can rescue the American economy, the truth beneath the surface is far more complex. The Congressional Budget Office projects that if things continue on their current path, America's federal debt, already towering, will rise from nearly 100% of GDP in 2025 to 118% by 2035. And a staggering 156% by 2055. By then, interest payments alone, already outpacing the defense budget, could swallow more than 5.4% of the entire economy, squeezing out critical investments in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. But this crisis won't explode in a single dramatic moment. It will bleed the system slowly. Growth will weaken, opportunities will shrink, and millions will feel the weight, not as headlines, but as silent, daily pressure. Yet that's just one scenario. Others warn of something faster and far more violent.
Good evening. We begin tonight with a major financial development. Moody's has downgraded the United States credit rating, citing rising debt and growing interest burdens. The credit rating agency lowered the U.S. long-term credit rating from AAA to AA1, removing the nation's last top-tier rating from the big three agencies. Moody's says the decision reflects large and growing fiscal deficits and an erosion of fiscal strength driven by persistent political gridlock and soaring government debt, now surpassing $36 trillion. The report warns that rising interest payments, which now exceed $1 trillion annually, could pressure future budgets and reduce fiscal flexibility.
In May 2025, Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit rating, citing rising debt and interest burdens. One political misstep, like a government shutdown, a debt ceiling standoff, or a delayed interest payment, could set off panic in global bond markets. In that scenario, yields skyrocket, the dollar tumbles, and markets crash, plunging the world into a crisis rivaling 2008.
Turmoil was caused by irresponsibility on the part of banks and financial institutions. Firms took reckless risks in pursuit of short-term profits and soaring bonuses, triggering a financial crisis that nearly pulled the economy into a second Great Depression. It was a little more than a year ago that we stood on that precipice. And several of the world's largest financial institutions had already failed, credit markets froze, and banks refused to lend.
The ticking stops, not because the danger disappeared, but because the fuse finally reached the bomb. And then there's the wild card. Trump's new economic vision, his so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, includes sweeping tax cuts and massive spending pledges. According to estimates, it could add $2.4 trillion to the national debt, with $550 billion more in interest alone, pushing America's total liabilities into the $50 trillion range by 2055.
So
I was like disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, like, everything he's done on Doge gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it could be both. My personal opinion.
Supporters call it necessary fuel for growth. Critics say it's a reckless gamble, one that could lead to deep cuts in Medicaid, Social Security, and even military pensions. And if global markets lose faith in America's ability or willingness to pay its debts, the consequences would be catastrophic. On June 21, 2025, the United States launched a direct strike against Iranian military targets. A flashpoint in a conflict already burning between Israel and Iran. It was the first major U.S. attack on Iranian soil in over a decade. B-2 stealth bombers soared silently overhead. They unleashed massive ordnance penetrators, weighty bunker busters on Fordo and Natanz. Tomahawk missiles streaked toward Isfahan. Underground nuclear facilities were shattered. No shots were fired in return. No warnings. Just precision and silence. But the cost, political, human, economic, had only just begun. Analysts estimate the cost of this new operation could reach tens of billions. And if it escalates, hundreds. At the same time, American annual aid to Israel is roughly $3.3 billion. But since October 2023, the U.S. has provided an extraordinary total exceeding $17.9 billion amid escalating conflicts. All of it paid by American taxpayers, not for schools, not for hospitals, but for missile shields, tanks, and Iron Dome batteries. Imagine this. What if just a fraction of that money had gone to Medicare, to rebuild classrooms, or to raise wages? Instead, it vanished into the desert air. This isn't just foreign policy, it's a moral policy, and every missile, every billion tells us exactly where our priorities lie. Debt is invisible until it isn't. It creeps through budgets, policies, futures, and one day it demands to be paid. Not in dollars, but in opportunity, in security, in trust. The fuse isn't just ticking anymore, it's burning bright. The question is no longer if it goes off, but when.